Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome back to my Saturday Hodgepodge, my weekly wrap-up of all things booktube, bookish, whatever happened during the week that I want to talk about and include. So there is going to be a political rant as a part of this video, which I'll label, but I am leaving timestamps down below. It's been pointed out to me that not everybody wants to hear my political thoughts, which is perfectly understandable. And not necessarily because they disagree with me, but because, hearing one more person who's angry about something going on in politics and the world today just adds stress to their life. So I'm going to leave timestamps down below when I start my political rant about schools and textbook controversies, and those kinds of things. Because I do have thoughts that kind of carry over from, the video I made last week. So I do want to do that. But I do want to start off both this week in reading. I got off to a really good start this week in reading, and part of that has to do with an improvement in the BookTube Prize reading. So I don't share the titles I'm reading for the BookTube Prize in these videos. I do that all at the end when I wrap up and give a review of all those. But the second book I read in my group, which is for translated fiction, the BookTube Prize, was very good. It was very interesting, fairly plot-driven, a little character-driven, but I just thought it really held my interest, and I thought it was really powerful, and so that was great. And I am starting my third BookTube Prize book this week, and I have high hopes for that book. Not too high, but high hopes for that book as well, and so that's been going a lot better. April is also Aussie April, one of the readathons which some people participate in, and I always miss Aussie April. So because I made April a month in which I'm trying to read short novels, a lot of books that are under 200 pages, like Small Things like these by Claire Keegan, which I talked about last week. I asked Jacqueline from the channel 6 Minutes for Me, and she's far more active on Instagram now, for the recommendation of an Aussie book that's less than 200 pages, and she recommended Cold Enough for Snow by Jennifer Au. So I read that on Sunday. Actually, I read it in a really short period of time. It's around, I want to say it's around 150 pages maybe. I read it in a really short period of time on my Kindle. And it was really, really good. When it started off, I thought the writing style was going to be a little bit too simplistic, a little bit too unadorned even for my taste. But as you go on, that simplicity of thought as captured in the sentences just becomes increasingly powerful and beautiful. And it's not that, it's stripped down. It's just that it's simple. And essentially, without giving any spoilers away, it tells a story of a young woman's trip to Japan with her mother who grew up in Hong Kong. And they go to Japan on this trip in a way to kind of reconnect with one another. The daughter has things she wants to share with her mother, and at times they're together, and then at times the daughter goes off on her own and then returns. And it's just really, I thought it was just really beautiful, emotionally powerful in terms of a person reflecting on their life, how their life fits in with the life of their mother, their sister, their other family members. Just really, really great stuff, in terms of our expectations of our parents, etc. I just thought it was really great, and I would highly recommend it if you want to read that book. I've also been continuing my buddy read with Margaret Pinard of A Clearing in the Distance, Frederick Law Olmsted, and America in the 19th Century by Witold Rybczynski. And this was our third set of 100 pages, and this one was a struggle for me because there's a lot about business in here, and I don't particularly enjoy reading a lot of details about business, about how businesses were managed or how money was managed. Not really one of those things that interest me. But the section ended with really what I thought the whole book would be about, which is Olmsted really diving headfirst, fully embracing this idea of being a landscape architect and designing Prospect Park in Brooklyn and South Park in Chicago and the Riverside neighborhood in Chicago and Buffalo and the park system there in Buffalo, and just really interesting stuff. And as long as the book's that, then or just about 19th century life in general, I'm pretty happy. So I'm hoping for more of that going forward. Margaret obviously is a great person to buddy read with, and a far better historian, I think, than I am. She's a lot more forgiving, I think, Rybczynski's habits and his approach than I seem to be at this point. So I have been reading that. And then I've also been reading The Hill's Reply by Tarjei Vesaas, a Norwegian author. And this is really kind of, I guess, the best way to describe it is it's a book of short stories. And these short stories, such as they are, oftentimes really feel more like prose poetry. These are unusual, odd. The perspective is unusual. Oftentimes they're disorienting. And as much as I'm enjoying most of the stories in the book, I do have to read them slowly. And I do find myself, when I've read one thinking, okay, I need to set this book down for a while and read something else or do something else. So that I can kind of think about that story and see what kind of impact that story has on me. And, I think one of the things that is sometimes true with me is when I'm reading a new or recently published book of short stories, I have a tendency to kind of rush through, to read one story after another without much break between. And sometimes that means then they kind of glom together and they don't become distinct. And I'm trying to avoid that with this. I have plenty of time to finish this book, which, by the way, I love this book. It has you can't tell, but it has a textured cover. It's an unusual size. It's the exact kind of thing I like in terms of, that appeals to me in terms of a book's design and its setup. So it's got that going for it too. So that's pretty much my week in reading. So I'm going to begin my kind of rant about school and politics. Okay, this is the third time I've attempted to record this rant, which is supposed to only be about education or schools, textbooks, and social media. So let me just establish some givens. Critical race theory is not taught in schools. Critical race theory doesn't teach anyone to hate the United States of America. Critical race theory essentially just says that since the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 have passed, racism, discrimination in the United States should have gone away, and results should have come out more equal among the races, but they haven't, and there has to be a reason for that, and they suggest the reason for that is systemic racism, which they go back in history and look for evidence that we built in racism into our system, which there's lots of evidence for. Regardless of that, that's not being taught in public schools. The woke agenda is essentially this: be nice to people and respect the individual choices they make. That's the whole woke agenda. That's what it means to be woke. Okay? To recognize there's injustice and to want to do something about it, and to believe that every person has the right to be whoever they want to be. It's none of our business who they want to be, as long as they're not hurting anybody else. It's none of our business who they want to be, and that everybody should be free to love and whoever they want to, and to be respected for the people that they actually are as American citizens and human beings. That's the entire woke agenda. Okay, so if you're afraid of wokeism, I just defined what you're afraid of. Equality is what you're afraid of. Acceptance is what you're afraid of. If you're afraid of critical race theory, what you're afraid of is the truth of American history. Okay? And if you're afraid of the LGBTQ plus agenda, what you're afraid of is equal and civil rights and equal treatment for people who fall under that heading. One of those headings in the LGBTQ plus acronym. That's what you're afraid of. Equality for those people. The line that's being pushed right now by governors like my governor, Greg Abbott in the state of Texas, and governors like Glenn Youngkin in Virginia, and governors like particularly Ron DeSantis in Florida, is that schools have begun indoctrinating kids into all these things. That schools are teaching kids to hate America because of the critical race theory. That schools are teaching kids to be woke, and to put wokeness above everything else, like, making money and capitalism. And that schools are in the most disgusting and horrifically awful way. They're claiming that schools are being used by members of the LGBTQ plus community to groom children, to turn them into LGBTQ plus people, which is disgusting and vile and is already leading to violence. This is being pushed by Republican politicians at the state level and at the national level, by the way. Okay? It's pure evil, and it's just also complete bullshit. I want you to think for a minute about your experience in school. And I want you to think of a teacher, and if you had more than one, think of a teacher or more than one teacher who you felt was trying to convince you to change your political point of view, to change you from a conservative to a liberal or a liberal to a conservative, etc. I know I was in school a long time ago, but I can't think of any. I taught school for 31 years. I was pretty open with my students about my political point of view, but I also pointed out the weaknesses in my political point of view and the good things done by people who were not of my political point of view. So some of them may think I was that person. But once you've thought of that teacher, I want you to ask yourself, did they actually change your political point of view? I'd be willing to bet you the answer is no. I've never met a single person who had a teacher who fundamentally changed their political point of view, from liberal to conservative, conservative to liberal, or whatever you want to call it. I've never met that person, okay? Because teachers don't have that kind of impact, and schools don't have that kind of power. People like DeSantis and Abbott want you to believe they do because they hate public schools, because public schools are one of the institutions in the United States of America that are the most democratic. We attempt to educate everyone as equally and as best as we can, regardless of their religion, regardless of their race, regardless of whether they're LGBTQ+, we try to educate everybody. It's an incredibly democratic organization, democracy organization, not democratic, isn't the Democratic Party. And this is why conservatives, people who call themselves conservatives now hate it, because they hate democracy. What they like is authoritarianism. They like having the power to punish corporations who come out in opposition to their political point of view, like Ron DeSantis with Disney. They like having the power to tell women that they have to carry to term a baby forced upon them by a rapist. They like having the power to say, we're going to discriminate against people who are not Christians. They like having the power to single out and to open up to ridicule members of the LGBTQ+ community as though they are the problem in American society. They like to have the power to make it appear as though members of minority communities are the ones who are causing problems in the United States of America. That's what they like having the power to do. And they're spreading fear of what's taking place in schools to gain that power, to scare white parents and white Americans into voting for them. So they can have that power to take rights and freedoms away, have that power to single out and to open up to harassment, people whose what they would call lifestyles they don't agree with, to silence historians and people who want to point out that American history is not perfect and that there are real problems in American history that we should acknowledge and honor the people who fought against them for fighting against them. They want to silence all of that because it doesn't give them power. It doesn't fit within their point of view. Lots of people, sometimes even here on BookTube, will tell you that the far left and the far right are the same. They are not. The far left did not attack the United States Capitol, but out of loyalty to one man in an attempt to overthrow a United States election and to install that man as a dictator to the United States. The far left does not have elected officials in the United States Congress who are still loyal to the guy who led the attempt to overthrow the United States government. The far left doesn't have thousands and thousands of militia members out there who are heavily armed and out in the woods training right now for the coming revolution. It's not the left that's out there encouraging people to kidnap the governor of Michigan. It's not the left that's out there, spreading hate which leads to violence against LGBTQ+ people. Okay? It's not the left. That's the right. And they are using this fear of what's taking place in public schools to gain power. And you and I both know, we just acknowledge that schools don't really change our political points of view. Students are not being indoctrinated to believe anything they didn't. And the most ridiculous part of this is the most hateful part. That schools are grooming young people to become prey for LGBTQ+ people. In other words, they think that if we acknowledge in elementary school that gay people exist, that heterosexual little kids are going to become gay. If schools had that kind of power, there would be no gay people in the United States over the age of 30. Because those gay kids would have gone to schools where they were constantly being indoctrinated about heterosexuality, where all the books were about heterosexual people, and all the families were heterosexual families. And they would be convinced, I can't, to become heterosexual because of that. And of course that's ridiculous. Schools don't have this kind of power, and schools and textbooks certainly don't have that kind of power. In addition to that, I can just tell you from my own experience, teachers do not have the time to try to indoctrinate your kid into anything other than learning to read and learning to do math and learning to do algebra and learning about, I don't know, scientific stuff. They don't have the time to do that. They're busy trying to teach the basic things. So if you're out there criticizing public schools on the one hand for not being able to teach kids to read, you can't also believe that they can teach kids to be gay or they can teach kids to hate America. It's just ridiculous. Now, the reason why I think there's so much of this belief out there is because of social media. I'm on social media. I'm on Twitter. Obviously I have a YouTube channel. I don't hate social media, but what social media does is it spreads anecdotal evidence. So if we're thinking about critical race theory, you may actually know someone whose child, or maybe your child, you think was made to feel bad by a teacher for being white. You post that on Twitter, or you post that on Facebook. It gets picked up and read and posted and reposted and rebranded and spread around on social media until everybody thinks they know somebody who this happened to, when in reality, there are only really, let's say, 1,000 real examples of it happening. Now you think, well, 1,000 examples, that's a lot. It's a lot until you remember that schools deal with millions and millions of kids every single day. So anytime that situations come up, that has been the extreme rarity. It is not the rule. And one of the things I find most ironic about Greg Abbott and Ron DeSantis and their attack on public schools is that the curriculum, the standards that both states have been teaching were put in place by Republicans. Not by woke liberal Democrats, but by Republicans like Jeb Bush and Rick Perry and Greg Abbott himself and Republican-controlled school boards. This is all just fake. They're just using this issue to try to scare white voters into voting for them so they can have power to control your life. That's far more of a reality than any kind of threat you might be under from the woke left cancel culture. By the way, the number of actual incidents of the woke left canceling people is another example of how social media spreads anecdotal evidence. It makes us all believe that it's common when in reality it's incredibly rare. Anyway, there's my rant. Going back to the rest of the video now. You sat through that whole rant to make up for that. I'm going to leave you with a little video I made of some Texas wildflowers. My wife and I went to the Austin area to visit my daughter for Easter, and all along the way there are bluebonnets growing on the side of the road. I think I mentioned before that here in the state of Texas, the state actually throws out wildflower seeds in the fall, and they come up in the spring, and it just makes driving in Texas a lot more beautiful than it was. There are bluebonnets and Indian paintbrushes and all kinds of other flowers. My wife and I thought we'd stop and take pictures and video of the bluebonnets, because bluebonnets are, really pretty much only grow in Texas, and they're the state flower, but we never did stop. So when I got home, I knew there'd be wildflowers growing around here, so I took some footage of those, and I will leave those here, and I will leave you with that. There's no narration and no music, just the sounds of nature and the wind, occasional birds, and unfortunately, since I live in the suburbs, cars. But anyway, I'm going to leave you here. If you want to watch that video, keep going. As always, look forward to your comments in the comment section below, and thank you for watching.